Ethan Parks stared at the screen of his phone, the glow reflecting off the untouched whiskey glass on his coffee table. No new messages, no missed calls, no notifications, unless you counted the 5 back-to-back texts canceling on him over the past hour. His 36th birthday was supposed to be something. Maybe not a huge celebration, but at least a dinner with friends, laughter, a bit of warmth. Instead, one by one, everyone had dropped out. "So sorry, work emergency. The sitter bailed on us. Let's reschedule soon, yeah?" Even Natalie, his girlfriend of almost 4 years, had texted him a vague, "running behind, probably can't make it, rain check," with a confetti emoji that felt more like an insult than a consolation. He wasn't surprised, exactly. The distance had been growing for months, in his relationship, in his friendships, even at work. But he had held on, convincing himself it was just a phase. Life got busy, people got distracted. Surely they'd show up tonight, if not for the celebration, then at least for him. But they hadn't. Now the reservation he made at Hearthstone Bistro, a private room set for 8, was waiting, and no one was coming. Ethan glanced at the clock. 6:42 p.m. The table was booked for 7. He almost called to cancel, almost ordered Thai food and curled up with his laptop, let the night slip by unnoticed. But something in him resisted. Maybe pride, maybe the ghost of the guy he used to be. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and muttered, "Screw it, I'll go anyway." He wasn't about to let everyone else decide how his birthday ended. If it had to be a table for one, then so be it. The walk to Hearthstone Bistro was short, just 6 blocks from Ethan's apartment, but it felt longer with every step. He passed cafes buzzing with Friday night energy, couples leaning into each other, groups clinking glasses. Everyone had somewhere to be, someone to be with. He remembered when that used to be him. Not so long ago, he was the one organizing happy hours, sending group texts, making dinner reservations weeks in advance to fit everyone's schedule. His friends used to call him the glue. Lately, he felt more like the forgotten label on the back of a fridge shelf. Once useful, now just there. He hadn't always lived this way. Growing up in Eugene, Oregon, Ethan was raised by his father, a widowed middle school teacher who never missed a parent-teacher night or a single basketball game. His dad taught him that showing up wasn't optional, it was the most important part. Ethan took that to heart. Whether it was helping friends move in the rain or staying up late to debug a coworker's code, he showed up. Over time, though, the same people he once counted on had begun to drift. There were no big fallouts, just the slow erosion of priority, of effort. Birthday texts became belated. Hangouts became vague maybes. Natalie, too, had changed. Once spontaneous and warm, she'd turned increasingly distant. Their conversations clipped and practical. Work had taken most of her attention lately, or so she claimed. Even at his job, a mid-sized data firm he'd been with for nearly a decade, things felt unsteady. His latest project had been reassigned to someone newer. He'd been asked to mentor a junior analyst with 0 experience, but clear favor from upper management. And then there was the all-hangs meeting last month, where the word restructure had been floated more than once. Ethan had built his life carefully, chosen stability over adventure, loyalty over flat. But standing there in the empty sidewalk glow outside Hearthstone, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd bet on the wrong things. He looked up at the warm lights behind the bistro's front windows. Inside, people were eating, drinking, laughing. That was supposed to be him. That was supposed to be his table. It wasn't just about the food or the bourbon pecan pie he special ordered. It was about being remembered, being worth someone's time. He had dropped hints for weeks, sent calendar invites, reminded people. He even made sure Natalie's favorite wine was on the table, and still, no one came. The truth hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't anyone's priority anymore. He took a breath, squared his shoulders, and opened the door. If this was going to be his birthday, then he'd damn well show up for it himself. He owed that much to the kid his dad raised. The one who believed showing up mattered. The hostess at Hearthstone looked up from her tablet, her smile flickering slightly when Ethan gave his name. "Ethan Park, reservation for 8?" she asked, already glancing toward the back room. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, change of plans. Just one tonight, if that's all right." She recovered quickly. Too quickly? And gave him the kind of polite sympathy smile he'd seen people give someone who just dropped their tray in public. "Of course. We'll still seat you in the private room if you'd like." He did. He didn't want to sit in the main dining area, surrounded by birthdays that went the way they were supposed to. He followed her past candlelit tables and couples sharing appetizers, his footsteps uncomfortably loud on the hardwood floor. The private room was as he remembered it. Warm brick walls, low lighting, a round table with 8 place settings, now suddenly absurd. The hostess quietly removed 7 of the place cards and tucked the menus away, leaving just one. "Your server will be right with you," she said, and disappeared before he could read her expression. Ethan sat down and took a long sip of water. The room felt bigger than it should have. Every empty chair its own little reminder. But he didn't leave. Could have. Could have gone home, watched something dumb, ordered Chinese, called it a night. But he didn't. Something in him, maybe pride, maybe exhaustion, refused to let this turn into another moment he let pass without meaning. He'd made the effort. He was here. Alone or not, he was going to eat the meal, drink the wine, and pretend, at least for an hour, that his birthday still mattered. The waiter arrived just a minute later, young and fresh-faced, trying his best not to look at the other 7 empty chairs. "Happy birthday, Mr. Park," he said, clearly prompted by the hostess. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" Ethan appreciated that the kid didn't ask if anyone else was joining him. He ordered a glass of red, then paused. "Actually, make it a bottle," he said, handing over the wine list. If he was going to sit in a dining room built for a party, he figured he might as well drink like one. The waiter nodded and walked off, leaving Ethan alone in the silence. Without the low hum of conversation, the room felt cavernous. He tried scrolling through his phone, but it was useless. Nothing new. Just more silence. He set it face down. Outside the private room, the restaurant was alive. Clinking cutlery, laughter, the murmur of date nights and group dinners. One woman outside the glass walls glanced in and then looked away quickly, embarrassed to have made eye contact. A couple at a nearby table peered in, as if they'd caught a glimpse of a museum exhibit, the man who ate alone. Ethan tried to shake it off. He unfolded his napkin, took a long drink, and placed the menu in front of him like it mattered. But the truth was, he couldn't stop the thoughts. Was this what the rest of his life looked like? Showing up for people who no longer showed up for him? Birthday plans unraveling without anyone thinking twice? The wine helped dull the edge, but it couldn't stop the ache in his chest. His salad arrived, beautifully plated and untouched for several minutes. He picked at it, chewing methodically while trying not to hear the clatter and cheer outside. The steak came next, medium rare, exactly how he liked it. But even that felt more like an obligation than a celebration. He wasn't angry, not really, just tired. Tired of being the one who always followed through, only to sit alone on a night meant for connection. Still, he stayed seated. Still, he ate the meal. If nothing else, he would finish what he started. Halfway through his steak, Ethan found his mind drifting, out of the restaurant, out of the present, back to all the moments that led him here. It wasn't just about tonight. This dinner, this table, this silence. It was just the sharpest point of a slow unraveling. He thought about the last time he'd really laughed with his friends, maybe a year ago, at a backyard barbecue. Before schedules got complicated and texts turned into "let's catch up soon," and then into nothing. He'd been the planner, the reliable one. People came to him for help, advice, a place to crash, and he'd always shown up. But lately, it felt like he existed only in people's rearview mirrors, seen briefly, then forgotten. His mind wandered to Natalie. When they met, she was magnetic, funny, driven, The kind of person who made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. For the first couple of years, things were easy. They synced up. Trips, music, in-jokes, long conversations at night. But the last 6 months had been different. Her job had picked up, and with it came endless meetings, networking events, late-night emails. She said she was exhausted all the time. She stopped asking about his day. Conversations became clipped, transactional. Still, he held on. Maybe out of loyalty, maybe out of fear. He didn't want to be the guy who let go too soon. But tonight, when she canceled without even calling, it felt final in a way he hadn't expected. Work wasn't much better. For years, Ethan had poured himself into it. Data analysis wasn't flashy, but he liked the logic, the clarity of it. He'd worked his way up slowly, earned the respect of his team, mentored interns, took on the tricky clients. But lately, something had shifted. His biggest account had been handed to a newer hire, and his weekly one-on-ones with his manager started to feel more like check-ins to justify his relevance. Last month, during a staff meeting, someone casually mentioned streamlining and resource reallocation, and he'd felt his stomach drop. No one said the word layoffs, but they didn't need to. Ethan took another bite of steak, barely tasting it. He thought about his dad again, a man who had every reason to check out after losing his wife but never did. He showed up. At games, school meetings, everything. He once drove 8 hours round trip just to see Ethan perform in a play where he had 3 lines. "You don't show up because it's easy," his dad had told him. "You show up because it matters." Ethan lived by that rule. But what did it mean when no one showed up for you? He set his fork down, stared at the half-eaten food in front of him, and let the weight of it all settle in. Not just the loneliness of tonight, but the slow fade of a life that no longer felt like his. He wasn't even sure when it had changed, only that it had, and maybe, deep down, he had known for a while. Ethan was swirling the last of his wine in the glass, debating whether to order dessert out of stubbornness or just pay the check and leave, when a sound floated in from the main dining room. A soft strum of an acoustic guitar. He hadn't realized there was live music tonight. The notes were quiet at first, almost hesitant, then steadier, fuller. He recognized the song almost immediately. Landslide by Fleetwood Mac. His mom used to play it on a dusty stereo when she cooked Sunday breakfast. Before the hospital visits, before everything changed. A lump formed in his throat. He hadn't heard it in years, and somehow it cracked something open inside him. Then the singer's voice rose gently above the melody. A woman. Clear, slightly raspy, raw in the best way. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. And then, during the second verse, she spoke softly into the mic. "This one's for Ethan Park. He's in the private room tonight, celebrating his birthday solo. If you've ever had one of those days, this is for you too." The guitar kept playing. Ethan froze. Did she just say his name? Conversations around the restaurant softened. Diners turned their heads. The waiter paused mid-step. Through the glass wall, Ethan could see her now. Late 30s, cropped hair, denim jacket, worn boots. The kind of person you'd pass on the street and wonder about. She didn't look away when she sang. In fact, her eyes locked on his. Not pitying, just present. By the end of the song, the room applauded. Then came something surreal. The first notes of Happy Birthday. She started singing, and the entire restaurant followed. Waiters, bartenders, strangers, smiling and turning toward the glass room like it was a stage. Ethan sat frozen, heat rising to his face. But it wasn't embarrassment. It was something else. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Recognition, warmth, a sense that maybe he wasn't as invisible as he thought. After the applause faded and conversations resumed, Ethan stayed seated, still processing what had just happened. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. Not like that. Not in a room full of strangers. He took a breath, steadying himself, when he noticed the singer walking toward the private room, guitar slung over one shoulder, a cautious smile on her face. She knocked gently on the open door frame. "Mind if I crash your party of one?" she asked. Her voice, unamplified now, was lighter but carried the same quiet strength. Ethan stood automatically. "Sure," he said, his tone unsure but curious. Though, full disclosure, no actual party happening. She smiled wider. "That's not what it looked like a few minutes ago. I'm Maya, by the way." She extended her hand and he shook it. Ethan Park. "I overheard the hostess telling your waiter about a birthday reservation that turned into a solo dinner," Maya explained. "Figured you could use this song. Hope that wasn't overstepping." Ethan shook his head. "No, it was... Honestly, it was the best part of the day." He gestured to the bottle of wine still half full. "I've got more than I can drink alone if you're interested." "I'm off the clock in 10 minutes, she said, glancing at her phone. "If you don't mind some company, I'll join you." He didn't mind. In fact, for the first time that evening, he felt something shift, like the room had opened up in a new way. Maya returned after her final song, guitar now packed away. She slid into one of the 7 empty chairs, took a sip from the glass he'd poured for her, and smiled like they'd known each other longer than 5 minutes. No awkward small talk, no apologies, just an easy presence between them. And for the first time all night, Ethan didn't feel like the guy who'd been forgotten. He felt like someone worth sitting with. They talked slowly at first, easing into the kind of conversation that only happens when there's no need to impress. Maya told him about her day job teaching guitar at a local after-school program and how her weekends were usually split between playing gigs and cat-sitting for neighbors. "I've got a cat named Bowie who knows how to open cabinet doors," she said with a smirk. Ethan laughed, really laughed. For the first time in what felt like weeks. In return, he told her about his work in data analytics, the uncertainty brewing at his company, and how the word restructure had started haunting meeting rooms. There was no pressure to perform or explain, just mutual honesty, spoken plainly. He shared how he'd been raised by a single dad who never missed a single milestone, how he used to feel like the reliable one in his circle of friends. Until slowly, without warning, that circle seemed to disappear. Maya nodded with quiet understanding. "I've had birthdays like this," she said, "where no one remembered, or they remembered late, like an afterthought. I used to think it meant something about me, like I wasn't worth remembering." That hit harder than Ethan expected. He didn't reply right away, just studied the half-empty wine bottle between them. "Yeah," he said finally. "That's exactly it." But sitting across from her now, hearing her say what he hadn't been able to admit out loud, he realized something else too. Maybe it wasn't about being worth remembering. Maybe it was about who remembered, and why. And when Maya raised her glass and tapped his lightly, no toast, no fanfare, just a quiet, "Happy birthday, Ethan," he felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been wound tight for too long. Something had changed. Ethan felt it in the way he leaned back in his chair, no longer stiff or self-conscious. The private room, once a painful symbol of who hadn't shown up, now felt different, like a blank slate rather than a failure. The empty chairs no longer mocked him. They simply existed. Maya didn't try to fill the silence with nervous chatter, and Ethan didn't feel the need to explain anything. Her presence was calm, unforced. It reminded him that connection didn't always have to be built over years. It could begin in a single, unexpected moment, with a song, a shared bottle of wine, and someone who looked you in the eye like you mattered. When the server returned to ask if they wanted dessert, Maya glanced at Ethan and grinned. "Didn't you say something about bourbon pecan pie?" He nodded. "I ordered it just for tonight. Didn't think I'd have to share, though." She laughed. "Too bad. I'm not going anywhere." Ethan smiled back, the first one that didn't feel like he was faking it. For the first time that day, and maybe in months, he didn't feel behind or left out. He felt present. 2.5 years later, Ethan still remembered every detail of that night. The soft lights in the private room, the warmth of the wine, and the way Maya looked at him like he wasn't a man people bailed on. A lot had changed since then. Natalie never followed up on that rain check. Instead, she ended things with a short, cold message 2 days after his birthday. No explanation, just a period at the end of something that had already faded. A month later, the restructuring at his company became official. He was let go with 3 weeks severance and a canned goodbye from a manager who hadn't looked him in the eye for months. But losing the job turned out to be the push he didn't know he needed. With Maya's encouragement, and a few introductions through people she knew in the arts community, Ethan launched his own data consulting service, working mostly with nonprofits and creative startups. It was scrappy at first, but it gave him something he hadn't felt in years: agency. He and Maya didn't rush anything. They started slowly: coffee after gigs, long walks, occasional dinners that stretched into midnight conversations. Over time, it just made sense. The quiet ease between them turned into something real. Last fall, they got married in the very same private room at Hearthstone Bistro. 8 chairs, 8 guests, no empty seats. Ethan often thought about how close he came to skipping that night, how easy it would have been to stay home, stew in bitterness, and let the day slip by like it didn't matter. But instead, he showed up for himself, and a stranger showed up for him too. That was what changed everything. Not a grand gesture or some perfect plan, just a song. A moment of being seen when he felt most invisible. Now, whenever someone talks about a birthday that didn't go how they hoped, he just smiles and says, "Sometimes the best ones don't start the way you expect." Because sometimes life clears out the wrong people, not to leave you empty, but to make space for the right ones to walk in, sit down, and stay. This story reminds us that being left behind isn't the end of the road. It's often the start of a better one. Ethan's birthday didn't go as planned. Everyone he thought he could count on disappeared. But in that silence, something unexpected happened. A stranger saw him, acknowledged him, and sparked a moment of real connection. The lesson is simple. When life clears out the wrong people, it's making room for the right ones. We all go through moments of loneliness, rejection, or disappointment. What matters is how we respond. Ethan chose to show up for himself, and that single choice changed everything. Sometimes, the people who show up out of nowhere are the ones who end up mattering the most. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever felt forgotten, invisible, or just needed a reminder that you matter, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it too. Like this post, subscribe to stay connected with more stories that speak to real life, and share it with friends or loved ones who might need a bit of unexpected hope today. Because sometimes, all it takes is a moment, a song, or a story to remind someone they're not alone.